So I made this little demo thing where you run across and then the bricks kind of crumble away, and I think they destroy themselves after a bit. But in this kind of cool Uncharted style fashion, and you can like fall through them. So I'll make a block, copy over here, just make it bigger a bit, and I'll add a normal puppet. So the actual way that the puppet is facing is actually the way the camera will be facing. The camera will start behind the puppet. So if I started it looking over there, and then I'm now facing this way. Whereas if I'll start it off facing that way, then I'll face that way with the camera. I'll also, in the controller sensor, if you go into the Important Properties tab with the imp icon, you can turn on Force Possession. And this way, when you start playing, you're already controlling the character. Cool, so now I'll make some bricks. So I want these to be like separate. So then I'll offset these two so they're kind of alternating. And select them all and like clone them like that. And now they kind of got this uneven pattern. You can even select one of the rows and make it even more out so it kind of feels more like it was built by a real human being. Now we want to kind of break these into chunks, which will make certain things easier. So you can just select like a whole row like that, but if you kind of make it uneven, then it feels more like it's real things. Imagine this to be like a set piece kind of thing. If we're running this way, then having bigger chunks fall away as you pass them at the start will make it feel more dramatic because you barely make it over to the other side. So I'll just group that. And to kind of pseudo randomize this, you can just like wiggle the controller a bit, and then I'm going to like remove, it's coming from this end, so I'll remove that one, group that, and then over here make them less and less. And then right at the edges, these will just stay intact. So now if I pull these groups out, you'll end up with this kind of ragged edge on both sides. These will fall, and then these will fall, and then these will fall, and then these will fall, as time goes on. So strictly speaking, it isn't necessary to group all these, but it makes certain things a little easier. So now I'm going to make a timeline, and I'm going to keyframe sets of these bricks to be movable. So I'll scope in with L1 and X, and now I can double tap X on one of these objects, and it will select everything in the group that I'm in. And then I can tweak one of them, and because this is the same type as the other things selected, it'll actually change for all of them and record for all of them in most of the settings. So if I just turn on movable, then if this was just out here and it's powered, then I can like check these other ones, they're movable as well. And if the keyframe is off, then they're not movable, so they'll stay in place, which means you can kind of time it over here. So if I move it along and turn off the grid, and then I just play time, then after 1 second those will start dropping, but then because it goes past that point, the keyframe isn't making them movable anymore, so they'll become non-movable and just freeze in place. So really want that to last longer, but then once they fall a certain distance, we can destroy them. This is where them being in a group is useful, because you could link this to every single brick like that, or you can scope out, and this is one big group, so let's link it to just that group. So now when it gets to this gadget and powers the destroyer, it will destroy that group, and then they get destroyed. So you'll probably have some sort of method of hiding stuff down there. So let's add a fog gadget. And I'll use a cube, so we just have like a flat area down there. So I'm actually grabbing the gizmo of the gadget, which means the gadget can be over here, and the gizmo of where it actually is in the world, where it affects, can be in a different place. So let's just do this. So just as with trigger zones, you can use R2 on the sides, but also hold shift, which is L1, and then use R2 on the sides, and it will drag the fall off. With the fog gadget, it's kind of less dense in this fall off, and then gets more dense towards the core. So if I do that, so when I'm looking from up here and the bricks fall away, then they kind of fall into the fog and then disappear. So even if the player happens to be looking down there trying to watch the bricks go, it will kind of smoothly disappear like that. Now I just do the same thing for these other objects at different timings. So let's just scale this up with I'm holding up on the D-pad. So we'll just like offset these and do the same. And then we can just drag all these so that they stay movable while they're all moving. And you can actually use the same destroyer. So if we just see whenabouts we need to make them disappear. So it's about near the end there. So I think that's about right actually. We can actually group these up into one big group. And then instead of using that to apply to just that object, we can destroy the whole thing like that. So so they'll all be falling until this point, at which time they'll all be destroyed. And you can even use that destroyer to destroy the timeline. And if I close that, you can see this special little nub. That's it going into itself, effectively. And you can see it going into the side of it. And the same thing happens with a microchip. So now it will play through and then destroy that whole effect because it doesn't need to have that in memory anymore. So when do we trigger that though? Let's trigger it with the trigger zone. And we'll put that so that it starts once they're kind of a little bit across, so it kind of adds some tension and scarediness when they're halfway through and then they rush to the other side. And we can actually add all this to a big chip that holds all of this logic. Put that in there, put that in there, and notice how the zone is here, and normally when you move a gadget, the gizmos and stuff move with it, but if it's in a particular place and then you drag it into a chip or a timeline, then it restores its position to where it was before you moved it, so that you can easily move them into chips. So then when this detects the player, it will power the timeline. But if I pin that to the screen, you can see a potential issue. If I go to test mode, if I rush across to the other side, it will then stop, and these will be like half fallen and things like that. What we really want this to do is once you've stepped into it, it will play through all the way to the end. So we can set that to once mode, which means even if it gets unpowered, it will keep playing to the end. But then that brings up another issue where if you run across and then into the zone again, it will start from the beginning again. So if I go into the zone and out of it and then back into it, you can see it starts back from the beginning again and everything freezes. This is because in once mode, whenever it goes from no power to power, it will reset it to the beginning. It will restart it. And if it goes from powered to unpowered, it will just carry on playing. So I think I'll show this technique. So if I use a keyframe, first, if we turn the timeline off, then we use a keyframe to turn it on. We can trigger that keyframe with the trigger zone, which won't make any difference until we turn on keep changes. So if we enter the trigger zone, it will turn on power for the timeline, and that power will just stay on. even if the keyframe becomes unpowered. So then when we go back into the trigger zone, it'll try to turn it on again, powering the keyframe, but the timeline's already on, so nothing should happen. So let's pin that to the screen as well. Oop. So in and then out and then back in, and it doesn't reset it because the timeline is already powered, so no change happened, so it had no reason to reset to the start. And now of course we've got everything in a chip, we can make the affected object be the chip itself, like that. Or in fact we could move the chip into the group. So if I use grid snap and make it larger with L1 and up, then I can kind of remember where this position is, and then hover over the thing, L1 and X while holding the microchip, and it will scope into that group and become part of that group. So now we can just move it back, and it was back to its position, and the trigger zone's still in the right place. So now when the destroyer happens, the chip and the group and everything and the bricks all get destroyed at the same time, like that. Now if I scope in here, we can get to the microchip. Scope out again. I'll just use a switch for debugging. I'll just make it really big here. Plug that into the keyframe, so that now it'll work normally, and now it will be debugging mode and it will just happen. So I can play time and just watch the animation happen. So you can see the bricks they fall, but they don't fall in a crumbly cool way. They just go straight down and don't change direction at all. I'd like to thank RevPlayer, Reiko, Freakers, and all of my other supporters for making this tutorial possible. Check out TAPgiles.com to find out how you can support me in helping Dreams creators. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll see you in the next one.